A routine trip to the supermarket turned into a fiery clash when a racist cop targeted a respected female army officer. What started as a tense exchange quickly escalated, exposing deep prejudice and abuse of power. The warm afternoon sun bathed the streets of Austin, Texas, in a golden hue, illuminating the bustling weekend scene. People meandered through sidewalks, chatting and laughing, while families enjoyed the comforting rhythm of an ordinary Saturday. In the midst of this peaceful atmosphere, Colonel Maya Carter entered the local supermarket with a calm and collected demeanor. Her appearance was casual and unassuming, a stark contrast to her remarkable career. Dressed in a plain white shirt, a pair of well-worn jeans, and sneakers, she blended effortlessly with the crowd. Maya was no stranger to simplicity. Despite her distinguished service as a high-ranking military officer, she preferred quiet moments like this, away from the formalities and pressures of her position. She took solace in the routine act of shopping, her steps deliberate as she made her way through the aisles. Her sharp eyes scanned the shelves, her mind focused on selecting a few essential items. Years of discipline in the military had instilled a sense of precision in everything she did, no matter how small the task. The supermarket buzzed with activity. Carts rattled over polished floors, children tugged on their parents' sleeves, and the faint sound of pop music played over the store's speakers. Maya paused in the snacks aisle, contemplating whether she should indulge herself with a small treat. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to relax, savoring the ordinary yet comforting environment. But just as she reached for a box of cookies, a loud crash interrupted the hum of the store. Her instincts kicked in immediately, and she turned her head toward the source of the noise. At the far end of the aisle, a tall man in a police uniform stood motionless. Beside him on the floor lay a packet of instant noodles and a bottle of soda, their contents partially spilled. The man, whose name tag read Brian Hayes, glanced down at the mess with a look of disinterest before casually stepping over it and continuing on his way. Maya watched the scene unfold with disbelief. It was a seemingly minor incident, but to her, it carried a weight far greater than what met the eye. Accountability was a value she held close, and seeing someone in a position of authority disregard it so carelessly struck a nerve. She hesitated for a moment, considering whether to intervene. Most people would have ignored it, unwilling to risk confrontation, but Maya was not most people. Her entire career had been built on standing firm for what was right, even when it was inconvenient. As the man turned into the next aisle, Maya made her decision. She stepped forward, her footsteps confident and deliberate, and followed him. Catching up to him near a shelf of canned goods, she called out in a calm but authoritative tone, "Excuse me, officer. You dropped some items back there. Perhaps you should pick them up so they don't inconvenience others." Brian Hayes turned slowly to face her, his expression shifting from mild annoyance to open disdain. He looked her up and down, his gaze lingering on her jeans and sneakers as if he were appraising her worth based on her appearance. When he finally spoke, his tone was laced with condescension. "And who are you to tell me what to do? I have more important things to worry about than a couple of spilled groceries." Maya's jaw tightened, but she remained composed. Years of experience on the battlefield had taught her the importance of maintaining control, even in the face of blatant disrespect. She met his gaze evenly, her voice steady but firm. "As a police officer, you represent the community. Your actions, no matter how small, set an example for others. Picking up those items isn't just about politeness. It's about showing respect." Brian smirked, the corners of his mouth curling upward in a sneer. "Respect is earned, not given. And I certainly don't take orders from someone like you. The dismissiveness in his tone was palpable. A few shoppers nearby had begun to notice the interaction, their curious glances betraying their interest. Maya felt their eyes on her, but she refused to let the growing attention distract her. She took a deep breath, centering herself before responding. This isn't about me. It's about responsibility. If you can't handle something as simple as picking up after yourself, how can the community trust you to handle greater responsibilities? The smirk on Brian's face faltered for a brief moment, but he quickly masked it with a look of defiance. He crossed his arms over his chest, his posture exuding arrogance. You don't know anything about me or my job. You're just another civilian sticking your nose where it doesn't belong. Why don't you go back to minding your own business? The words stung, not because they held any truth, but because they represented a mindset Maya had spent her entire life fighting against. She took a step closer, her voice lowering but gaining intensity. I've spent decades defending this country and leading soldiers into battle. Don't lecture me about responsibility. The uniform you wear is a symbol of trust, and right now you're betraying it. Brian's eyes narrowed as he processed her words. For a moment, he seemed taken aback, as though her confidence had caught him off guard. But instead of conceding, he leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a near growl. You think you're better than me because you served. Let me tell you something. Your medals and your titles mean nothing here. You're just another woman trying to act tough. Maya's heart pounded, but not with fear. The anger that simmered within her was not uncontrolled rage, but a steady, righteous determination. She straightened her posture, her presence commanding despite her modest stature. This isn't about me acting tough. It's about standing up for what's right. And if you can't understand that, maybe you're the one who doesn't deserve to wear a uniform. The tension in the aisle was palpable now. More shoppers had gathered, some pretending to browse the shelves while others openly watched the confrontation. A few had even begun recording on their phones, the faint glow of their screens betraying their actions. Maya noticed the shift in the atmosphere but remained focused on the man in front of her. Brian Hayes, however, seemed to grow more agitated under the weight of the crowd's silent judgment. He glanced around, his posture stiffening as he realized he was becoming the center of attention. Desperation crept into his voice as he tried to regain control of the situation. You think you can embarrass me in public and get away with it? Do you have any idea who I am? I could have you thrown out of here in a heartbeat. Maya held her ground, unshaken by his threats. She had faced far greater challenges than an arrogant officer in a supermarket. Her voice was calm but carried an undeniable edge. If you think your position gives you the right to intimidate people, you're mistaken. Power comes with responsibility, and you failed to uphold it. The crowd murmured in agreement, their whispers growing louder. Brian's confidence began to waver as he realized the tide was turning against him. The smirk that had once dominated his face was now replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. Maya took a step back, giving him space to make his choice. She hoped, for his sake, that he would recognize the opportunity to right his wrongs. But as the seconds stretched into silence, it became clear that he would not. Without another word, Brian turned on his heel and stormed off, leaving the spilled groceries where they lay. The crowd parted to let him pass, their expressions ranging from disapproval to outright disgust. Maya watched him go, her heart heavy but her resolve unbroken. As the murmurs of the crowd faded, an older woman approached Maya, her eyes filled with admiration. "Thank you for standing up to him," the woman said softly. People like him need to be held accountable. Maya offered a small, humble smile. It's not about confrontation, she replied. It's about doing what's right, even when it's uncomfortable. With that, she turned and made her way to the checkout line. The weight of the encounter lingered, but Maya knew it was only the beginning. This was no longer just a minor incident in a supermarket. It was a moment that would ripple far beyond these walls, challenging complacency and calling for accountability in every corner of society. The supermarket buzzed with a hushed tension as Colonel Maya Carter stood in the aftermath of her confrontation with Officer Brian Hayes. The crowd lingered, exchanging whispers and side glances, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and admiration. Maya, however, remained composed. Her shoulders were square, her face calm, and her gaze focused as she gathered her thoughts. She knew the confrontation had stirred something much larger than the spilled groceries at the end of the aisle. It had exposed a crack in the very principles that should hold those in authority accountable. As Maya prepared to leave, she noticed a few people still recording on their phones. She had no desire to escalate the situation, but she also understood the power of witnesses. She offered a polite nod to one of the onlookers, a young man clutching his phone nervously, before turning to head toward the checkout line. The weight of the confrontation hung heavily in the air, but Maya carried it with the quiet dignity she had cultivated over years of leadership. Just as she reached the produce section, a sudden voice called out from behind her. "Hey you." Maya turned slowly, her instincts sharp and alert. There, standing with a stiff posture and clenched fists, was Brian Hayes. His face was flushed, his jaw tight with anger. He had returned, and this time, his demeanor was far more aggressive. Maya's heart quickened, but she remained outwardly calm. Years of military experience had taught her how to face volatile situations without flinching. She straightened her posture, meeting his gaze with unwavering steadiness. "Yes. Can I help you, Officer Hayes?" Brian took a step closer, his voice low and laced with hostility. "You think you're better than me? You think you can walk around and humiliate me in front of all these people? Well, you're wrong." The few remaining shoppers nearby froze in place, their curiosity now mixed with apprehension. A woman holding a basket of vegetables glanced nervously at Maya, as if silently urging her to defuse the situation. Maya's gaze didn't waver. She took a deep breath, her voice calm but firm. "Officer Hayes, this isn't about me or you. This is about accountability. If you feel humiliated, that's a consequence of your own actions, not mine." Her words struck a nerve. Brian's hands twitched at his sides as he struggled to maintain his composure. He stepped closer still, invading her personal space, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You need to learn your place." The phrase sent a wave of anger coursing through Maya's veins, but she suppressed it, refusing to let him see any sign of weakness. Instead, she leaned slightly forward, her tone measured but cutting. "And what place is that, Officer Hayes? As a citizen, I have every right to hold you accountable. Your badge does not place you above the law." Brian's eyes flickered with something between fury and frustration. He opened his mouth to reply, but the sound of a phone's camera shutter interrupted him. Both Maya and Brian turned toward the source of the noise. A teenage girl stood nearby, her phone raised as she captured the moment. Brian's face twisted with anger as he pointed a finger at the girl. "Put that phone away. Now." The girl froze, her hands trembling as she slowly lowered her phone. Maya immediately stepped between them, her voice sharp but controlled. "That's enough, Officer Hayes. You will not intimidate her. The tension in the air grew thicker as the crowd around them began to swell once more. Whispers and murmurs filled the space as more people stopped to watch. Maya could feel the weight of their eyes, but she remained focused on Brian, who was now visibly struggling to maintain control. You think you can just stand here and tell me how to do my job, he spat, his voice growing louder. You have no idea what it's like to be out there every day, dealing with people like you who think they know better. Maya tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. People like me? And who exactly do you think I am, Officer Hayes? Brian hesitated for a moment, his lips curling into a sneer. You're just another woman who thinks she can act tough. But let me tell you something. You're out of your depth. The crowd gasped audibly at his words, the blatant condescension sending ripples of discomfort through the gathered onlookers. Maya felt her jaw tighten, but she refused to let his provocation control the narrative. Instead, she stepped forward, her voice low and steady. You're making a mistake, Officer Hayes. Every word you say, every action you take, is being watched and recorded. This isn't just about you and me anymore. This is about the values you represent, and right now you're failing. Brian's face flushed an even deeper shade of red. He glanced around, realizing the truth in her words as he noticed the phones pointed in his direction. His arrogance wavered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. But rather than back down, he attempted to double down. His voice rose, his frustration boiling over. I don't care who's watching. You think you can scare me with your self-righteous lectures. You're nobody, just a washed-up soldier trying to feel important. The insult hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. Maya felt the anger bubbling beneath her calm exterior, but she refused to let it consume her. She had faced far worse than this, on the battlefield, in boardrooms, and in countless other moments when standing her ground had been a matter of life and death. Her voice remained even, but her words carried a sharp edge. Washed up or not, I know what it means to take responsibility for my actions. Can you say the same, Officer Hayes? The crowd murmured in agreement, their support for Maya growing louder. Brian's confidence faltered further as he struggled to maintain his composure. He glanced around again, his eyes darting from one phone to another, the realization of his predicament slowly sinking in. Maya took a step back, giving him space to respond. She hoped, for his sake, that he would recognize the opportunity to de-escalate the situation and salvage what little dignity he had left. But instead, he clenched his fists and turned abruptly, storming out of the store without another word. The crowd erupted into a mixture of applause and murmurs as Brian disappeared through the sliding glass doors. Maya stood in the center of the aisle, her shoulders squared and her gaze steady. She allowed herself a brief moment to exhale, the tension slowly dissipating from her body. A middle-aged man approached her cautiously, his expression one of gratitude. Thank you for standing up to him. It's not every day you see someone hold people like that accountable. Maya offered him a small, polite smile. It's not about making a scene, she replied. It's about doing what's right, even when it's uncomfortable. The man nodded, his admiration evident. Well, you certainly have my respect, and I'm sure you have theirs too. He gestured toward the crowd, many of whom were still watching Maya with expressions of awe and appreciation. Maya nodded in acknowledgement before turning to leave the store. As she stepped out into the sunlight, she felt the weight of the encounter settle over her like a heavy coat. She knew this wasn't the end. The confrontation had exposed something much larger than a single officer's arrogance. It had revealed the cracks in a system that allowed such behavior to persist. And while Maya had no intention of seeking the spotlight, she also knew she couldn't ignore the responsibility that came with standing up for what was right. As she walked to her car, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out to find several notifications, messages from friends, news alerts, and a flood of social media mentions. It seemed that the confrontation had already begun to ripple beyond the walls of the supermarket. Maya sighed, tucking her phone away as she climbed into the driver's seat. She had no idea what the coming days would hold, but one thing was certain. This was only the beginning of a much larger fight for accountability and justice. The next morning, the quiet hum of the news cycle was abruptly interrupted. Videos of the confrontation between Colonel Maya Carter and Officer Brian Hayes had gone viral overnight, spreading like wildfire across social media platforms. The clips, recorded from various angles by witnesses, captured every tense moment. From the casual arrogance of Officer Hayes to Maya's calm yet commanding response, the footage left no room for doubt about the incident. By sunrise, it had reached the desks of local news stations and city officials, sparking widespread outrage. Maya woke to a flood of messages and missed calls on her phone. Friends, former colleagues, and even strangers had reached out to express their support or share their own experiences with abuse of power. She scrolled through the messages, her expression thoughtful but composed. While the overwhelming wave of solidarity was encouraging, it also reinforced the weight of what lay ahead. This was no longer just a personal confrontation. It had become a public reckoning. As Maya prepared for her day, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. The name on the screen read David Sinclair, the mayor of Austin. She hesitated for a moment before answering, bracing herself for the conversation. "Colonel Carter, this is Mayor Sinclair. I trust I'm not catching you at a bad time." "Not at all, Mayor," Maya replied evenly, though her curiosity was piqued. "How can I assist you?" There was a brief pause on the other end of the line before Sinclair continued, his tone measured but firm. "I'm sure you're aware of the incident yesterday involving Officer Hayes. The footage has reached my office, and I wanted to assure you that we are taking this matter very seriously. Your actions have brought attention to an issue that cannot be ignored." Maya listened intently, her posture straightening instinctively as if she were back in a military briefing. "I appreciate your concern, Mayor," she said after a moment. "My intention was never to cause a spectacle, but I couldn't stand by and let his behavior go unchecked. And that, Colonel, is precisely why we need to meet. I'd like to discuss the next steps and ensure that justice is served. Can you come to City Hall this afternoon?" Maya agreed without hesitation. As she ended the call, she felt a surge of determination. This was an opportunity to not only address the immediate issue but also to push for meaningful change. By the time she arrived at City Hall, the steps leading to the building were lined with reporters and cameras. The media frenzy was palpable, their voices rising in a cacophony of questions as Maya approached the entrance. She kept her head high, her expression calm yet resolute, as she navigated the sea of flashing lights and microphones. A security officer escorted her inside, where she was greeted by Mayor Sinclair and a small group of city officials. The mayor was a tall, distinguished man with salt and pepper hair and a sharp gaze that conveyed both authority and empathy. He extended a hand as Maya entered the room. "Colonel Carter, thank you for coming on such short notice. Please have a seat." Maya nodded politely and took her place at the conference table. The room was filled with an air of urgency, the officials exchanging glances as Sinclair began to speak. The situation with Officer Hayes has escalated beyond what any of us anticipated, he said. The footage has not only gone viral, but has also sparked a broader conversation about accountability and conduct within our police force. Maya listened quietly, her hands resting on the table. She could sense the tension in the room, the unspoken acknowledgement that this was a defining moment for the city's leadership. We've initiated an internal investigation, Sinclair continued, his tone firm. Hayes has been placed on administrative leave, effective immediately. However, given the public outcry, we need to take this further. We're prepared to open a formal inquiry and involve independent oversight to ensure transparency. Maya leaned forward slightly, her gaze steady. That's a start, Mayor, but this can't just be about one officer. This incident is a symptom of a larger problem. Accountability must be systemic, not situational. Sinclair nodded, his expression thoughtful. I agree, Colonel, which is why I want to involve you in this process. Your perspective as a military leader and a citizen will be invaluable as we work to implement lasting reforms. Maya hesitated for a moment, her mind racing. While she had no desire for the spotlight, she couldn't ignore the potential impact of her involvement. I'm willing to help, she said finally. But this has to be about action, not just words. People need to see real change. The mayor smiled faintly, a hint of relief softening his features. Then we're on the same page. Let's get to work. Over the next several hours, Maya and the city officials discussed strategies for addressing misconduct within the police force. They outlined plans for increased oversight, enhanced training programs, and mechanisms for community involvement. Maya's insights, drawn from her years of experience in leadership, proved invaluable. She emphasized the importance of integrity, accountability, and leading by example, values that had guided her throughout her career. Meanwhile, outside the walls of City Hall, the public response continued to grow. Protests and rallies sprang up across the city, with citizens demanding justice and reform. Signs bearing slogans like accountability for all and no one is above the law were held high as people of all backgrounds came together to voice their concerns. The incident had ignited a movement, one that transcended the boundaries of the supermarket where it had begun. By late afternoon, the mayor held a press conference to address the situation. Flanked by Maya and other city officials, he spoke directly to the citizens of Austin. The behavior displayed by Officer Hayes was unacceptable, and it does not reflect the values we uphold as a community. Thanks to the courage and integrity of Colonel Maya Carter, we have been given an opportunity to address these issues head-on. Sinclair went on to outline the steps being taken to investigate Hayes and implement broader reforms. Maya stood quietly by his side, her presence a silent reminder of the principles at the heart of the movement. As the press conference concluded, Maya stepped forward to answer a few questions from reporters. Her voice was calm and measured, her words carrying the weight of her conviction. "This isn't about me," she said. "It's about all of us. We all have a responsibility to hold those in power accountable and to ensure that justice is upheld. Change doesn't happen overnight, but it starts with moments like this." The room erupted in applause, the sound echoing through the halls of City Hall. Maya allowed herself a small, private smile, knowing that her words had resonated. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Maya returned home. She sat on her porch, her thoughts swirling as she reflected on the day's events. The fight for justice was far from over, but for the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope. This was more than just a confrontation in a supermarket. It was a turning point, a chance to make a difference. As the stars began to twinkle overhead, Maya made a silent vow to herself. She would see this through no matter how long it took, because justice, she knew, was worth fighting for. The days following the confrontation in the supermarket marked the beginning of a whirlwind for Colonel Maya Carter. What had started as a simple act of standing up for what was right had now evolved into a nationwide movement. The story of her encounter with Officer Brian Hayes had spread far beyond the borders of Austin, sparking debates on news programs, social media, and within communities across the country. Her name became synonymous with accountability and courage, but for Maya, the attention was both a privilege and a responsibility. Sitting in her modest home one morning, Maya sifted through a pile of letters and emails from people she had never met. Some messages were simple words of gratitude. Others detailed personal stories of facing injustice and feeling powerless to fight back. Maya read each one carefully, her heart heavy with the weight of their words. She had never sought to be a public figure, but now she realized the importance of using her voice to amplify theirs. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. When she opened it, she was greeted by a young woman in a crisp suit, holding a microphone and a cameraman standing just behind her. "Good morning, Colonel Carter. I'm Rachel Stevens from Channel 8 News. Would you have a moment to speak with us?" Maya hesitated for a brief moment before nodding. She had given a handful of interviews over the past week, each one more emotionally charged than the last. While she wasn't fond of the limelight, she understood the significance of keeping the conversation alive. As they sat down on her porch, Rachel began the interview with a question Maya had come to expect. "Colonel Carter, you've been called a modern-day hero for standing up to Officer Hayes and sparking a national dialogue about accountability. How does it feel to be at the center of all this?" Maya took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "I don't consider myself a hero. I was simply doing what I believe anyone should do when faced with injustice. This isn't about me. It's about the principles we hold as a society and the need to protect those principles, even when it's uncomfortable or difficult." Rachel nodded, leaning forward slightly. "Many people have praised your composure during the incident, especially in the face of Officer Hayes' hostility. How were you able to remain so calm?" Maya smiled faintly, her expression thoughtful. "Years in the military taught me that anger doesn't solve problems. It clouds judgment and makes it harder to find solutions. When I stood there in that supermarket, I wasn't thinking about winning an argument. I was thinking about what kind of example I wanted to set, not just for myself but for everyone watching." As the interview continued, Maya shared more about her experiences in the military and how they had shaped her values. She spoke about the importance of integrity, the need for accountability in positions of power, and the role that ordinary citizens play in driving change. By the time the interview concluded, Rachel and her cameraman were visibly moved. "Thank you for your time, Colonel," Rachel said as she shook Maya's hand. "Your story is an inspiration." After the reporters left, Maya allowed herself a moment to reflect. She knew the path she had chosen was far from easy, but the messages of support and gratitude reminded her why she had to keep going. The following week, Maya was invited to speak at a town hall meeting organized by Mayor David Sinclair. The event was held in a packed auditorium, with citizens, activists, and local officials in attendance. As Maya stepped onto the stage, the room erupted into applause. She felt a pang of nervousness but quickly steadied herself, reminding herself of the importance of the moment. She began her speech with a simple acknowledgement. "Thank you for being here tonight. This isn't just about one incident or one person. This is about all of us and the kind of community we want to build together." Maya spoke passionately about her vision for accountability and reform. She highlighted the importance of training programs that emphasized empathy and responsibility for law enforcement officers. She advocated for the creation of independent oversight committees to investigate misconduct and ensure transparency. She also called for stronger ties between law enforcement and the communities they served, emphasizing the need for mutual trust and respect. The crowd listened intently, their expressions a mix of admiration and determination. Maya could feel the energy in the room, a collective desire for change that was both palpable and inspiring. As she concluded her speech, she left the audience with a powerful message. Change doesn't happen because of one person or one moment. It happens because people come together, stand up, and demand it. We all have a role to play in creating a more just and equitable society. And it starts right here, right now. The applause that followed was thunderous. Maya stepped off the stage, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. She spent the rest of the evening speaking with attendees, listening to their stories, and answering their questions. Each conversation reinforced her commitment to the cause. Meanwhile, the investigation into Brian Hayes was well underway. The footage from the supermarket, combined with testimony from witnesses and Maya's own account, painted a clear picture of his misconduct. The Independent Oversight Committee, formed at Mayor Sinclair's insistence, found that Hayes's actions were not only unprofessional but also indicative of a larger pattern of behavior. Former colleagues and community members came forward with additional complaints, further solidifying the case against him. On the day the committee released its findings, Maya was invited to City Hall to witness the announcement. The room was filled with reporters and city officials as Mayor Sinclair addressed the crowd. The behavior of Officer Hayes was unacceptable and a betrayal of the trust placed in him by this community. Effective immediately, he has been terminated from his position and will face further disciplinary action. The announcement was met with a mix of relief and applause. Maya remained composed, though she felt a sense of closure. While she knew this was only one step in a much larger journey, it was a significant victory for accountability. Over the next several months, the reforms Maya had advocated for began to take shape. New training programs were implemented for law enforcement officers, emphasizing ethics, communication, and community engagement. An independent oversight board was established to investigate complaints of misconduct, ensuring greater transparency and fairness. Community forums were held regularly, fostering dialogue and trust between citizens and law enforcement. Maya became a prominent figure in these efforts, though she insisted on keeping the focus on the larger movement rather than herself. She spoke at events, participated in workshops, and continued to share her message of integrity and accountability. Her presence was a source of inspiration, particularly for young women and marginalized communities who saw in her a reflection of their own struggles and aspirations. Despite her growing influence, Maya remained grounded. She continued to live a quiet life, balancing her advocacy work with moments of solitude and reflection. On weekends, she would often visit the local park or spend time volunteering at a community center, finding joy in the simple act of giving back. One evening, as she walked through her neighborhood, she noticed a group of children playing in a nearby yard. They laughed and shouted as they chased each other, their energy infectious. Maya paused to watch, a small smile tugging at her lips. In their laughter, she saw a glimpse of the future she was fighting for. A world where every child could grow up in a community built on fairness, respect, and justice. As she continued her walk, her phone buzzed with a notification. A message from a young woman she had met at a recent event appeared on the screen. Thank you for standing up for what's right. You've inspired me to do the same." Maya stared at the message for a moment, her heart swelling with a quiet sense of pride. She knew the road ahead would be long and challenging, but messages like these reminded her why it was worth it. The legacy of the supermarket confrontation would live on, not as a story about one person but as a testament to the power of courage and integrity. And as Maya looked up at the night sky, she made a silent promise to herself and to the countless others who shared her vision. The fight for justice is never over, but it is a fight worth waging. And I will keep fighting for as long as it takes. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel to support more powerful storytelling like this. And don't stop there. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next video. We'd also love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below to let us know how this story impacted you or what you'd like to see next. Your feedback helps us create meaningful content that connects with you. Thank you for being a part of our community. Your voice matters,